Killer Instincts is the penultimate episode of Season 3 of the White Lotus, so what did we learn? Let's dive in. Welcome into the Pop Culture Life. I'm John Lunsford, and we are now only one episode away from having the full story of what's going on in Thailand. But we had some more things to learn this week in the 7th episode of the season to get us to the shootout that we hear at the beginning. So the episode begins with Rick finally getting his face-to-face meeting with Jim. Frank is doing a poor job of posing as a big Hollywood director and oddly didn't seem to do any research before accepting this job from Rick. Frank quickly falls off the wagon after that whole speech he gave a couple of weeks ago and starts drinking again once he realizes that he's basically blowing it. Rick takes Jim to the other room, meanwhile, and confronts him finally about murdering his father. When he finally says his mom's name, Jim seems to remember it, but can't get a word in edgewise because Rick's screaming at him the whole time. But instead of shooting him, Rick simply pushes his chair over and storms out. He explains to Frank that he did finally get some closure by confronting him, but I have to imagine that storyline isn't over. It really wasn't a satisfying enough end, and I'm still kind of the belief that Jim will end up being Rick's father, which is why he knew the mom's name. Rick and Frank then decide to go out and party, and Frank falls so far off the wagon he may never get back on. They go to the club, Frank does some drugs and drinks, and they take the party back to the hotel and do all kinds of stuff. Knowing what Frank said in his whole monologue a couple of weeks ago, I'm kind of glad they stopped showing things there. Of course, if you watch The Righteous Gemstones after the White Lotus, you know old baby Billy isn't afraid to run around naked. Next up, Saxon is having a whole bunch of issues spring up all at once. He finally confronts his dad about him acting weird the whole trip and demands to know what's going on. Timothy says, hey, everything's fine, and Saxon continues to bring up that, hey, look, if something's happening at work, it's going to affect me too. But Timothy, once again, sweeps it under the rug and says nothing is wrong. I kept waiting for him to say all of the stuff that's wrong, but he never did. We do see in the look ahead that Timothy is talking to their health mentor, and she has the bag of phones since it's their last day at the resort. And I'm curious how bad his phone has been blown up over the last few days with all that's happened. Of course, I know Saxon's phone is probably going to be blown up too, so I have to imagine that Saxon will find out and will find out pretty quickly what's going on back home. Saxon invites his parents to come to Greg's party and tries again there to connect with Chelsea. He talks about how all of Greg's older friends only have their young, hot girlfriends because of their money and that Chelsea is the same. But she denies that and says that Rick really is her soulmate because basically opposites really do attract. She's optimistic, he's pessimistic and depressed, she's hopeful, he's spiteful, and that one of these days, one of those is eventually going to win over the other. After the party, Saxon tries to connect with Chelsea on a spiritual level since that's important to her, but he instantly tries to touch her hands and she pulls back and kicks him out of the room with a few books to read instead. At the party, Saxon is told by Chloe that Greg knows that she slept with the Ratliffs and is fine with that because he actually kind of gets a thrill out of watching Chloe with other people, and he can ultimately kind of come in and win her over the other man. So Chloe asks Saxon to come back and role play with them, and he kind of gets freaked out, refuses, and leaves to walk Chelsea back to the hotel. As for the rest of the Ratliffs, Victoria does not want to be at the party, but she says, I'm all dressed up, so let's go ahead and go. She does end up talking to one of the younger girlfriends and kind of takes the same approach as Saxon of saying, look, you know you're just with him because of the money, right? And the girl says, no, I actually love him. At the monastery, Piper and Lachlan go through a few exercises with everyone, and afterward, Lachlan says he basically wants to stay with Piper there, which kind of makes her a little weirded out. Lachlan says he doesn't want to give in to his dark side and doesn't want to return home, so Piper quickly ends the conversation and goes to bed. I kind of thought after episode 6 that maybe Timothy would be the one to stay behind to avoid all his problems, and hell, the whole family may stay now, except for Victoria. She's kind of in her own little world, but who knows? Meanwhile, Belinda does go to Greg's party as well at the urging of Zion, knowing that, hey, I'll have your back if anything happens. Greg confronts her and asks to speak with her privately, where he admits that he is indeed Greg. I know we all knew that, but he is indeed Greg, and that he had nothing to do with Tanya's death. And he really just came to Thailand to escape the accusations that he did have something to do with it. He says that Tanya would have wanted him to live in peace and that, he knew he took Tanya away from Belinda back in Hawaii in season 1. So he offers her $100,000 for her wellness center that Tanya was going to help pay for, but Belinda knows that it's basically him buying her off so that she won't admit who and where he is. After all, he wouldn't have changed his name if that was the case. Belinda says she needs to think about it, grabs Zion, and goes back to the resort. Zion urges Belinda, hey, take the money because there's a chance Greg's going to come after us if you don't take it. Now, I've gone all this time and I haven't even really talked about the storylines around the Muay Thai fight. And honestly, I thought the fight would be more of a backdrop to the whole episode than it actually was. They mixed in aspects of the fight throughout the episode with every storyline, but it actually was only a small part of the episode to bring two storylines a little further down the line. The first one is Laurie gets in a fight with her friends, Kate and Jacqueline, over Jacqueline and Valentin hooking up. Jacqueline goes after Laurie saying, hey, your issues are your own. Stop blaming me and other people. So Laurie leaves and goes to the fight to meet up with Valentin, Alexei, and Vlad. They hang out, and then Laurie and Alexei go back to his place and sleep together. It turns pretty quickly into Alexei trying to scam Laurie for money for his ill mother in Russia, but she's actually saved by Alexei's girlfriend coming again like they did at the party, which gives her an opportunity to escape through the window and catch a taxi back to the resort. Also at the fight were Gaitak and Mook finally going on their date. They go to eat beforehand, and Gaitak admits, look, I can't really bring myself to hurt anyone. Of course, if that's the case, maybe you shouldn't be a security guard where you could be called upon to do such a thing in defense of what you're guarding. Mook says that she thought he had more ambition than that. At the fight, he looks down and he sees Laurie with the three Russians and realizes pretty quickly that they are indeed the robbers. We never really saw the second guy in the car the way that the robbery was shot, but in a flashback from Gaitak's perspective, we see Vlad get out of the car with only a mask over his mouth and his nose, but you can clearly tell it's him. I feel like we've all known that they were the robbers, especially since Valentin was the distraction at the gate, but it was finally confirmed in this episode. It was also confirmed by Laurie seeing all of the stolen jewelry in Alexei's apartment. You're almost left wondering if maybe she took some of the jewelry and put it in her bag on the way out. Watch her end up getting caught with some of that if that ends up happening. The last thing we see as we try to figure out exactly what happens in the final episode is Timothy once again fantasizing about using that gun. He kills Victoria, he kills himself, although this time he also kills Saxon to kind of save him from the disappointment of ruining his career. He goes to get the gun and, I don't know, maybe finally use it, but of course finds that it's missing. Now we know Gaitak took it in episode 6, but Timothy now knows that somebody has been snooping around his room. We'll see whether he actually suspects Gaitak or somebody else. So that's where we are as we get ready to see what actually happens in the finale. We know there's a shootout because we hear a lot of shooting at the beginning. The whole story is told through Zion's eyes in that first episode, and so I assume he's not ultimately caught up in it. The look ahead's very vague, as obviously they don't want to give too much away, but what we do see is this. First off, Timothy asks about eating from the suicide tree. Basically, the fruit can kill you if you eat it. Obviously, we know he's having those thoughts, but I've seen a lot of people talking about, hey, maybe he's using that fruit to make smoothies for his whole family and maybe do like a cult-like mass killing. They do show the smoothie machine in it too, so we'll see if that actually comes to play. Belinda and Zion do go talk with Greg again, but Belinda does not seem happy about taking the money. Gaitak also tells his superior something, and it seems like he's ratting out Valentin, at least the way they shot it for the look ahead. Chelsea tells Rick that she loves him and begs him not to do something stupid again, and he says that he'll be okay, so I'm sure the gym angle's not quite done with. Sam Rockwell does pop up for a quick second in the look ahead, stabbing a mannequin for some reason. I don't know what's happening there. So there's still a lot that can happen based on the look ahead. There's a few angles the shooting could take, and here's kind of what I'm thinking. First off, I've thought from the beginning that the firepower seems to be way too much for anybody to be involved other than the Hollinger's guards. And so for the guards to be there at the hotel, one or both of the Hollingers must be too. I still think it would be them shooting mostly, but it could take a few different approaches in how they start shooting, because I don't think they would start shooting themselves, although that is a possibility, but rather in defense of something. One approach could be Rick bringing his fight with Jim back to the hotel. There could be a confrontation that causes the bodyguards to start shooting. I don't know if this will be the case though, because Rick did throw away the gun that Frank got him, but the look ahead made it seem like, hey, maybe the story's not over. What I'm guessing will happen is Gaitak will either confront Valentin, or maybe Alexei and Vlad come back for some nefarious reason. Maybe it's to continue their scam against Laurie and or Jacqueline and Kate. This could lead to Gaitak finally trying to stand up to them. For that kind of firepower, I could see it maybe being those three versus the guards and Gaitak, or something along those lines. I don't know that any of the Ratliffs will be caught up in the firefight, but I have been wondering how this season will top others. The first season saw a one-on-one, almost accidental stabbing. The second season saw a bit of a firefight, but it was Tanya trying to save herself on the yacht, and then of course she fell off and killed herself. I thought that maybe this season could be two different stories in terms of who dies, so that maybe the shootout plays out like I mentioned with Gaitak, the bodyguards, and either Rick or the Russians, but then a second death could come from the Ratliffs in some form of the fruit or something like that. One theory I've seen that I'm kind of buying into now involves Timothy using the fruit to make a smoothie for Saxon. Maybe himself and Saxon, or maybe everybody in the family, but Saxon's so worried about everything that Timothy just kills him so he doesn't have to worry about it. The issue, though, comes when they finally get their phones back. And in the few days since they gave them up, maybe things end up working out back home and he didn't have to kill anyone after all. So maybe that's kind of the crazy twist in it. I saw a lot of funny predictions that Piper actually was the one that ratted Timothy out because they said somebody ratted Timothy out on the phone. And maybe that's why she wants to stay. I would die laughing if that was the case, and I don't think that's the case. I don't know that Belinda will get caught up in anything, and her storyline with Greg plays out maybe in some way that doesn't involve her in the shootout. Maybe seeing the shootout through Zion's eyes at the beginning was a bit of a misdirection from that angle. So my final predictions on who will die from the main cast is nobody. If anybody did die, it could be Guy Talk finally trying to man up. It could be Rick doing something stupid like Chelsea has asked him not to do multiple times. Saxon could die in a number of ways, either drinking the smoothie, trying to stand up for somebody like Chelsea if Rick does indeed do something stupid, or some other reason. And maybe one of the females could get caught up in it somewhere. I would probably lean Laurie. The reason I say nobody is I wouldn't consider this main cast, but I do think at least one or two, if not all three of the Russians will die, and maybe a bodyguard or two. Think back to last season. There was a decent body count, but most of them were side characters for the most part in the shootout. Only Quentin was considered a main cast member. And then, of course, Tanya died in a totally different way than the actual conflict. So there could be kind of a Tanya-style oopsie kind of death. That's where I'm leaning that maybe Saxon dies, but then Timothy learns everything's going to be okay when they go home. But the main deaths from the shootout, I think, are going to be mostly side characters. I don't know that Belinda will die or Greg because I feel like they have to keep the Tanya storyline going on in season 4, and it has been renewed for a 4th season. The only people that really carry that storyline on are obviously Belinda and Greg. Greg is the only person that's actually been in all 3 seasons, so let's see if they try to keep him alive and keep him in the next season somehow. But I don't know how much more his arc can actually grow. Zion can also kind of keep it going through his mom, and then there's Portia, Tanya's assistant from season 2, who could potentially make a comeback. There's also Porn Chai, who we didn't see in this episode. Don't forget, he and Belinda clearly have a thing, and they haven't shown him since he said he wanted to help Belinda open a place of their own. The good thing about this show is that you don't know what will happen, and literally anything and everything can happen. Let me know your predictions in the comments of who you think will die in the final episode and who you think will be involved in the shooting. Also, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more White Lotus recaps, including the season finale next week, other TV show recaps, plus movie reviews, entertainment news, and so much more.